Suzi, thank you so much for chatting to me today. We're going to be talking about how aligning customer experience and employee experience can be crucial for learner engagement. What's interesting is a lot of the time in L&D we speak about performance and enablement, and both of those are linked to the final product or service a customer receives. So is aligning to the customer experience actually a great way of driving that performance, driving that enablement?
Yeah, absolutely. CX can be such a powerful tool for that. I think it's really important for, especially for L&D functions, to really understand what are sort of the behaviours and skills and knowledge that really drive those really powerful customer interactions, so that you can then tailor your training programs, coaching materials, resources around that, and really help, especially non-customer facing teams, to understand the role that they're playing in the overall customer experience. Because unless they have that clarity, they're not going to make those links by themselves. But then finding, once we've got that, once we understand what those skills and knowledges are that really contribute to those moments that matter for customers, how do we do more of that? And what value does that bring to the customer, and what are we missing? So it's really, I think, around just tailoring and supporting L&D functions to understand how every role in the business contributes to customer experience, and then the knock-on effect that that has on employee experience by creating those really positive interactions with customers and the feedback that you get as a result of that.
Do you notice that I think a lot of companies don't often have a clear definition of what a good customer experience looks like, and actually it's very subjective. So actually, is that a good starting point to define really what a good customer experience is as a team and make sure everyone's on the same page?
Yeah, absolutely. I think really understanding where you are in your customer experience journey. So that might be just looking back at your previous customer satisfaction surveys. What data do we have? What data do we need to see where those strengths and points that you need to build on are? Because it really doesn't matter where you are in that. You need to sort of understand, well, where are we trying to get to, so that you can then build that data set around that. And that really helps from an L&D team perspective, because then they can prove the ROI and effectiveness of their learning programs by saying this is the direct impact that it was having on that customer experience.
Yeah, so precisely. If you look at your data and it says like most of the feedback around poor satisfaction scores are response time is too long, and then you gear people up to respond quicker, then you can actually have not only can you measure response times, you can measure the feedback around response times, and therefore they proving your impact more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And really looking at where do those CX journeys and data sets overlap with employee experience. So as you've just said, if we know that internally we've got problems with communication, or the teams are struggling with that, or they struggle with challenge of internal stakeholders, do we have that same issue in customer experience, and how do we relate the two? So I think really mapping those two journeys on top of each other to look at what do we expect from our internally and our customer experience, employee experience, and how do we treat each other and talk to each other, how do we communicate, how do we collaborate better, and how does that impact on our customer experience?
One thing I love to do is work from the goal backwards. So if we do that exercise where we define what a good customer experience looks like, how do we then kind of step by step work back to feed that into not only the learning experiences but the overall employee experience as well?
I think really good question. I think it comes back a little bit to what we were just saying around, to be able to do that, you have to start backwards with where we are in that customer experience journey. So like we've talked about, what data do we have? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What do we need to build on? And then how do we map that to the skills, behaviours and knowledge that we need to input into our team? And that really helps from an employee experience journey, because if you can give learners that motivation and understanding of why does this matter, how does that impact our customer experience, and ultimately happy customers, you'd hope, would result in more profitability and overall business output. So them understanding that, I think, is so important to give them the why.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Motivation is so key. People often want to feel like they're doing meaningful work, and if you can say, look, if we do this, our customer experience is going to improve in this way, and that means that your job's going to be more fulfilling in that way, I can see now how all this overlaps really.
Yeah, and the motivation as well. Like we find at Huler that when we can give our product teams who spend so long developing the product but they don't really have the opportunity to speak to customers, or our technical teams to say, our clients loved this, but this is a little bit of what they struggled with, and this was some of that direct user feedback, that's so valuable for them because it gives them insights into that world that they don't normally have. And if you're not doing that and closing that feedback loop constantly, or providing those teams who aren't customer facing with the data they need to do their jobs well, then all we're doing is making assumptions on what we think the customers might need or what the market might need without that being really informed.
Never build anything on assumptions. That is always my thing. You alluded to it a bit there. People play different roles in the customer experience. So it's not as simple as just saying, look, a good customer experience is this, and there's a blanket way to weave that into how people learn and how they perform. So how can we make sure we tailor what we do to people's different role in that overall customer experience?
Yeah. We had a really interesting conversation about this at Huler last week. So we were getting all of our managers together to look at how do our business goals that we're setting out for the next 2 years translate into team goals, and then what do the individual roles play in that. So we have 4 different pillars, one of which is excellence, and we want to deliver excellence in customer experience. So I was sat with our content and our creative teams who were saying, well, I just don't understand how my role or my team role plays in that. So I was saying to our head of creative, well, if you think about that whole end-to-end journey, from the moment a customer thinks about joining Huler, their interactions are going to be the website, our socials, the decks that we put forward as part of that sales journey. We really pride ourselves on having that real creative visual experience. So every single visual touch point that a customer has ultimately leads to part of a buying decision about whether they're going to come and be part of our customer base or not. So Luke was like, oh, okay, like I get that, but how do I measure that? How do I know what to do with that? Because ultimately, from a creative standpoint, that can be very subjective. I think it looks great. Customer thinks it looks great, but how do you put a metric or a success metric against it? So we were saying, well, actually, that's not on you as the department lead. That's on us as customer experience and that sales process to ask the right questions at the right time to be able to inform those different departments of how that has an impact. So just asking really simple questions at key points in that journey to say, okay, well, of your decision to come and work with Huler, how much of that was due to the visual impact that created for you? So through, like I said, socials, website, decks, all that sort of stuff, the product itself. So there is an ownership on people who are customer facing and roles that are customer facing to think outside of just their own remits to how can we provide and get the information that informs other departments so they understand the role that plays in the overall customer experience.
No, I think it's hard sometimes you're like an unsung hero in a company to see how your role connects, but I like the approach you mentioned there, like facilitates that understanding. People then can start to get more of a vision on where their role is, and like it might just be that simple as that it's about the visual touch points. Some people have bigger roles to play as well, and I suppose that as long as you have that awareness, that often, I suppose, helps as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is customer experience is really established. It's been around for a while. It's far more of an established focus than maybe employee experiences. But we often learn from disruptors in our space and the upstarts and whatnot. So, are there lessons that the customer experience can learn from the employee experience in your book?
Yeah, so you're right. In customer experience has been around for a lot longer, particularly in consumer-facing businesses. Now, when I started at Huler, I started in employee experience. Been in this space for sort of 5 years, was doing employee experience and people management roles before that. So I'll openly say I'm a little bit biased towards employee experience. It's my first love. But there's a lot of research out there from the likes of Salesforce and Forbes Insights that if you're going to do this alignment, start with EX, because it's proven that the knock-on effect that a really fantastic employee experience has on the customer experience and profitability. So I think one of the things that we found really interesting when growing the culture at Huler was to break away from that really static HR EX journey and try to bring that to life and to personalize it in as many ways as you can so it feels really unique from the employee. So one of the things we've started is just that view of what is every single touch point a customer has with the moment that they think about coming on board with Huler to the moment that they leave, and how can we apply what we've learned in EX to that of, right, how do we bring this to life? How do we personalize that? How do we get those data and feedback points at every single touch point without it being too data-led and not losing that human connection that's so important in employee experience? So our people teams and L&D teams are all about creating that supportive, collaborative space that's empathetic, that really understands what drives an employee. And there's so much of that that's applicable in the customer experience journey of well, actually, how do you bring that to your customer interactions? How do you coach your employees through those moments where it is challenging or difficult with clients in the same way that actually feels much easier with an internal stakeholder than it is an external stakeholder? So I think, like I said, very biased, but we're really coming at it from a different side of how do we build everything that we've grown at Huler into our culture and apply that to that customer experience journey. And then the beauty of it comes, we're not quite there yet, of when we can overlay those data sets and bring together all of our CX, EX and our learner data all in one point and really inform then L&D teams around this is the trends that we're seeing in EX and CX. We need to be doing that within our learning programs and make sure that content is inside our LMSs and we're pulling out from our CRMs and all those sorts of things to make sure that both journeys are very data-driven and insight-led.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the example that came to mind when you mentioned that EX example is retail. When people are really demotivated in retail, it comes across on the shop floor. When the employee experience is really great at a company, then that comes across on the shop floor as well. And I think, there is... I know we spoke about working backwards from the customer experience, but actually the employee experience is a foundation for people to go on and set the expectation or drive the standards of the customer experience as well.
Yeah, I think retail's a really interesting point there because if you imagine other sectors where you have time at your desk away from customer interactions where you can absorb learning in your own time, a lot of functions and roles within retail and hospitality don't have that luxury. They're having to find those moments in the day when they're not with customers to squeeze in that learning and absorb that in the moment. So coming at that from a completely different angle of, well, how do we make that really sort of accessible, bite-sized, understanding how we're going to deliver that in the moment and also accommodating for some of that beautiful customer distraction of, okay, well, actually now this is my focus and this is my priority. So I think learning within the context of retail and hospitality has to be looked at so differently to accommodate for that when you don't have the beauty of, well, I can step away from that and I can process and take that information in.
I used to work at Primark for 5 years and I can tell you from experience there's not much time to think about anything a lot of the time. So that's a nice segue though into the last question, which is the role of tech. You mentioned it being accessible, available at the point of need. But what role does tech have to play in both ensuring the EX and CX are good, but they also collaborate and they're going in the same direction?
Yeah, I think really for me this is twofold. So the first one is very much around how can we expect our employees to deliver a really fantastic customer experience if the tech that they're using inside of work is clunky or outdated or confusing or sometimes just unenjoyable. I think we spend so much time focusing on how we reduce that load for customers, but we're really willing to add to that digital overload for our employees and just stacking tech on top of tech. So I think really understanding and streamlining and applying that same consumer grade tech that we would do for our customers to our employees to streamline that journey so that we can focus more on delivering for our customers. And then I think the second point is very much around what we've already talked about. So tech has that amazing role to play if it's done well at bringing together all of the information inside your LMS, your CRMs, your employee engagement experience systems to look at how do those all talk to each other. How do we use that information? How do we empower our employees to get the most out of it? So looking at how you bring all of that data and insight together in one place, accessible in a couple of clicks without having to search through lots of disparate systems, I think is so important.
Yeah. I really love that because I think some companies can fall foul of ensuring they have a good customer experience at the expense of the employee experience, because it's well, look, I know it's painful to use this tech on the back end, but think about the customer experience. But actually, as we know from the rest of this conversation, that doesn't work. So I think that's a great point as well, just making sure that tech is great for both sides of the fence, and then ultimately the customer wins.
Absolutely, and prioritising it. There's some really cool companies or big name companies, the likes of Spotify and Netflix, who are using the same algorithms that they use for their customers to apply that inside of their organisation to match, for example, projects that you want to be part of based on the skills and interests that you have. So I think there's some really good examples out there of how brands are taking what they've done inside of that customer journey and applying that to their employee experience journey.
I didn't know that. That's some homework for me to go and check out this Spotify example. That's awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation, Suzi. Thank you so much. And hopefully people can get in touch with you using the links in the show notes if they want to know more about what you do. And then if there are any questions about that customer experience, employee experience overlap.
Yeah, absolutely. Always happy to talk, and it's been great to come on. So thanks so much.